Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first Merkle Meets this summer. For all those who've attended some of the previous sessions, welcome back and look forward to having an engaging discussion about MiCA. On April 20th, 2023, the European Parliament passed MiCA and TFR. Some called it a landmark regulation for the European Union. Hester Pierce called it a model for the US. Today, we're going to have a panel discussion with two esteemed experts on what does MiCA mean for the world, what are its implications, the scope and potential, and of course, my favorite part, how does this relate back to AML CFT requirements for crypto companies? I'm Mrigank Patnaik, one of the co-founders and the CEO of Merkle Science. I will be your moderator for the session. Julio, could you please start with your introduction?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I think it is the right moment to have this type of conversations around regulation and where regulation could lead us in terms of business. I'm Julio Ferron. I'm head of crypto solutions at KPMG Spain. I'm also coordinating some of the European groups that we have at KPMG. And basically, we are focusing on providing services around digital assets to two types of clients: regulated banks, or traditional clients that are in some manner entering the crypto space, but also the new players, the virtual asset service providers, or the crypto asset service providers, as MiCA defines them, in order to help them to comply with all the regulations, all the requirements that came not just, of course, from MiCA, but also from AML and other regulations that they will have to comply in order to provide business in the next months. So that's it. I don't know, Lynn, if you are there.
I don't know if you can hear me right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Okay. Apologies for the tech mishap here on the introduction. So just to pick up on your question, if you'd like to restate it, please.
No, it's just an introduction.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Julio. Delighted to be on a panel with you today. My name is Lynn McConnell. I'm currently head of compliance and MLRO here at Greengage in London. We are a digital merchant bank in the city of London, serving the fintech and digital communities. Prior to this, I spent almost 3 years at finance and compliance in both the UK and France. And I also have earlier served in compliance roles in the city. I was a UK regulator for 3 years during the financial crisis. So kind of looked at things from both sides of the fence, so to speak. Over to you.
Great. Welcome, Julio and Lynn. So I think the first question that's on a lot of people's minds, what is the UK's phased approach to crypto regulation? How does this differ from MiCA regulations in the EU? So Lynn, would you like to get started talking about the UK first?
Certainly. Currently, the UK has regulations under the money laundering regulations here in the UK, which were promulgated as recently in 2017 and amended in 2019. And they have a registration process, which started in 2020. Applicants have been able to apply since then. The FCA is the primary supervisor for money laundering regulations for crypto assets and was appointed by the Treasury to provide that service. So right now, we're just finished a consultation with the Treasury here that is considering additional structure for UK regulation. And the Minister, Andrew Griffith at the Treasury, is in charge of the digital asset program and promulgating any new regulations that will be coming into force in the UK later in the year. We also have a financial promotions regime change, which is under FISMA, where the government is going to bring the crypto asset firms into the regulatory perimeter of the financial promotions regime. So those are the primary situation. That's a primary situation right now.
Great. Julio, it would be great to hear from you about MiCA and how you think it compares.
Yeah, on my point of view, and without going into much detail around UK, I think that in the last months we are perceiving, especially talking with other colleagues that are non EU based, that the European regulator has positioned as a pioneer in terms of regulating the crypto asset services and also the issuing of digital assets. We can agree that MiCA is not covering everything. That's important. So it's not a perfect regulation. There are many things that are not covered, like NFTs, let's say a complete framework for NFTs, DeFi, and decentralized autonomous organizations. But we have a framework to use in all the EU members, and that give us some ground in order to build services. So if we compare right now the European or the European Union regulation to other frameworks like US or maybe Asia in some countries, we can consider that this is a very important milestone, not just for Europe, but also for the industry itself. So that will be my view on comparing not just against the UK, but also with the other regulatory frameworks, the other important regulatory frameworks worldwide.
Yeah, just to follow on from Julio's remarks, one of the really big benefits will be harmonization across the EU and the provision of definitions. I think there are a lot of international regulators outside of the EU, such as in Asia or the Middle East or Latin America for that matter, that may be watching, how certain concepts are established and set up, such as, for example, e-money tokens, the definition of e-money tokens or asset reference tokens, and how those are going to be supervised and managed, and what the additional requirements will be for custodians and crypto asset exchanges known as crypto asset service providers, CASPs, under the EU regime. So everyone's kind of looking at this as a framework that they can copy from or derive some additional ideas around how to protect consumers in their markets.
Exactly.
Great. So yeah, I think you talked about harmonization and a few key requirements. So what would you say are some key new regulatory requirements introduced by MiCA? And from a harmonization perspective, how would passporting work, or even just technical standards of implementation?
Yeah, I mean, I will take this one, and please later, Lynn, add whatever you consider. Right now, and that's important, and the EU, the European Union, we only have some AML regulation. This AML regulation obliges the obligate entity, in this case, the virtual asset service provider, to be registered in the country that they are going to provide services. Let's say the requirements that they have in order to get that registry is to handle a procedure of AML requirements, and also a risk assessment of the crypto activity. That's it. Even when many companies, virtual asset service providers, are saying that they are already licensed to offer crypto services, that's not true. They are just registered, which is a different thing. Right now with MiCA, we have a complete framework that is not just covering AML, but also covering aspects regarding of course, the transparency, the disclosure requirements. Is also regulating, and a very important point, which is the market abuse, which was one of the probably pain points that we had at the digital asset space. So MiCA is giving us the complete framework that is completing what we already have. Just to give some points of what is MiCA regulating, because I think it's important to get the goals, and then we can go a little bit on the requirements for the companies. MiCA, it's regulating the issuance and admission of crypto assets to trading, including, as I said, the transparency and disclosure requirements. It's introducing a license scheme. That's important because we had just registered for AML. It's also clarifying the regulatory obligations that are applicable to the issuers of asset reference tokens, e-money tokens, and also, even when there is no, let's say, authorization scheme, the other type of crypto assets. Some people are calling them utility tokens, which is the third, let's say, type of token that is regulated under MiCA. For me, it's better to keep it at as the other assets, not just as utility tokens. And then, of course, as I said, is also pushing the some confidence into the market, providing or establishing a market abuse regime that prohibits the manipulation and the insider trading. And we have seen that in crypto, as I said, in the last years and months. And also is clarifying, and that's important, the power. So it's giving some framework for the regulators and supervisors to get the different roles around the framework. In terms of the provider itself, so if I'm a crypto company and I want to provide service in the EU, of course, the first point is that the applicant must have a registered offices in one of the EU member states. So that's important. It has to have also program of operations, which explains all the proposed activity of the services that they are willing to provide. They have to have internal control mechanisms, and those controls probably at some of the providers were already in place, but they need to be in line with the expectation of the regulators. In some cases, we can look at what the traditional non-crypto players are doing. So, for example, banks. So the expectation is that the crypto companies that wants to offer services in the EU in the EU space, they are compliant with I would say a strict level of requirements compared to what they have today. Also, they have to have risk assessment procedures, business continuity plan, prudential safeguards, and maybe we can go later a little bit further into that. And those points together with what they already have in terms of AML. So it will be a complete overview of all the activities that a company should take into account in order to provide services closely to what we have in other areas which are not crypto in Europe.
Thank you, Julio. That's a great coverage of a lot of different topics. So I'll try and pick a couple of threads and move through those. Certainly, the MiCA regulation is going to require reserves, a conflicts of interest policy framework for each company, financial stability provisions such as the BCP and prudential requirements. I know, for example, in Lithuania recently, the registration for crypto asset service providers has increased the capital requirements to 125,000 euro. So each individual country may have their own individual capital requirements. Also, requirements for custody arrangements. Safeguarding of customer assets is particularly important. There's also a provision for consumers or customers to have withdrawal of their assets after up to 14 days. So we do have some consumer protection around that. And also documentation. If you have an issuer of a crypto asset, they're going now to have to provide a white paper. So the white paper provisions are very important. There are certain requirements that are set out in the legislation for the topics and the information that has to be provided in the white paper. So each jurisdiction may have individual requirements for information, but the requirements for a white paper will be standardized across the EU. And this will be very useful, I think, for the industry because everyone will have the same standard for disclosure. They also have conduct rules. Everyone has to be providing information that is clear, fair, and not misleading. So there's some general consumer protection provisions around conduct and communications. So I think that's most important. Also, the regulation defines stablecoins and also gives certain specific supervisory powers to the EBA to be the supervisor of what are designated as significant stablecoins above a certain threshold level. So the EBA will be taking that particular excuse me for that interruption. The EBA will be taking up supervisory responsibilities for stablecoins, and the stablecoin provisions will require audits and publication of reserves. So they will be addressing some of the issues that the market has seen around stablecoins in the past several years. And then also the New York State Department has also been addressing in some of their regulation that you may have been reading about in the press.
I mean, yeah, just to add there, and I think Lynn has raised some interesting points. There are some, let's say, practical implications around this for companies. So what is being discussed right now in the market about what MiCA is covering or is requiring or not? So first of all, and taking the point around stable coins, as some of you have heard in the last months, there is an important discussion, especially in the regulated sector, traditional sector, TradFi, around stable coins versus deposit tokens. So probably you have seen us, Societe Generale, has issued a stable coin. But right now the conversation is if a bank should be issuing a stable coin or a deposit token in order to have money tokenized. They are understanding that there is advantages on having money on blockchains, but now they are exploring what are the differences between doing it with stable coins and doing it with deposit tokens. In the case that this analysis basically provides the output that is not making sense to issue on stable coins, well, we have created a framework that it's just allowing credit institutions to issue stable coins, but nobody will use it. So this is something that is right now under discussion, and that's important that is taken into account. Also, we have to take into account together with what implies to have stable coins which are referenced to euros, the initiative that we have at the ECB right now, which is the digital euro, and how those things could be complementary in some manner. So at this extent is what we are trying to understand from a practical point of view. Also, from virtual asset service provider perspective, the point that probably, especially around the custodians, the digital asset custodians, not the technological providers, the custodians itself, it's about their requirements. Some of the TradFi companies are considering that the requirements for these new custodians are not, let's say, strict enough. So these are the points that right now are basically raising some questions and some discussion on the market.
Good point. Another item to talk about that people may be interested in is the passporting provisions. The idea is that the passporting should be relatively smooth and is not designed to be a second form of reapproval or re-registration at the ESMA level. So the legislation basically forecasts that once an applicant is registered with a national competent authority in their home jurisdiction, where they will offer their services first, then they will just simply take their registration number from their regulator, provide it to the ESMA registry, and they should be able to be registered and then eligible to passport into other jurisdictions relatively shortly. So it's intended to be an easy and smooth process and not to require a second round of reapproval. Just to make that point.
Yeah, and maybe adding to that, it's important to comment the restrictive reverse solicitation provision, which is included in MiCA, and basically it's focused on the non-EU based companies that wants to offer services in the European Union. So in the case that these companies are not actively promoting the services in the EU, they are basically exempt to have the license. So if it is the client that goes to that company that is not EU based, they will be exempt to have the license. But what we are seeing also in the market is that every single important international player is looking to apply for a license in the EU, as long as it's probably, as we have commented, the first complete regulatory framework covering the digital or the crypto assets activities.
Just to continue on from your points, France is currently considering a fast-track modular licensing effectively approach because they currently have their PASAN registration process, but they are going to they have already a second level of registration, which is known as licensing. And that is the step up to all the additional protections and compliance procedures that we discussed a few minutes ago. So once that happens, they're providing in their current discussions an 18-month grandfathering period for those French firms that already have become registered. So it's important to note that there will be some individual provisions in individual jurisdictions that already have registration processes in place. Also, some countries have two regulators and some countries have one consolidated regulator. So in Spain, for example, Julio, you can talk about the Spanish situation. In France, you have the ACPR, which is the money laundering regulator. And then you have the markets, the AMF, the markets regulator. And they work in concert in a form of sort of joint conference committee, if you will, to approve these registrations in a joint process. So Julio, what's it like in Spain if you apply?
Yeah, in Spain, we have basically one regulator that is taking care of the registry right now, which again in Spain is just AML registry, which is the Bank of Spain. They are working closely with the CEPLAC, which is the one that is handling or the supervisor that is handling anti-money laundering. We expect that in the different regulations that are within the digital finance package, which are MiCA and pilot regime, have more involvement from CNMV, which is kind of the Security and Exchange Commission that we have in Spain. The point here, and I think this quite interesting, it is if I'm a crypto company and I have a fast track in France, are not companies, the virtual service provider from France, having advantage in terms of market itself than a company that is in Spain or it's in Italy, for example? So that's an important point, because right now in the incoming months, maybe we see a little bit of I don't know, regulatory arbitrage or companies that are willing to go to France, for example, and get the license there, as long as this is the first framework where they can have the fast track. So that's interesting, because as I said, some countries could be in a disadvantage in the incoming months until we have MiCA in place.
Just following up from that point, so I think there's also a question about what type of license would be required by WASPs. As I can see, a lot of the participants are also CASPs/WASPs from outside of Europe. So have you seen any particular countries that become the preferred choice or are becoming the preferred choice for CASPs trying to enter Europe from the outside?
I would say that's a tricky question, because at the end of the day, apart from France and Germany, it's supposed to be in each country the same situation in terms of requirement, which as I said, is just the 6th AML directive and each country transposition, which is used, as I said, some high-level requirements in terms of AML. So at this moment, if you want to provide services in the European Union, you have to go to each country and get the registry in each country. So that's the situation right now. But, and I think maybe Lynn, you want to add something here. In the future, when we have the passport in place with the MiCA framework in place, maybe there is some place where the regulators are a little bit, I don't know, or less strict. And some companies go directly to, and I think we have commented before with Lynn, Estonia or Lithuania, we don't know. So that could happen. So it's important that this process of common ground for each country, it's happening in reality, because if not, we are going to see some regulatory arbitrage that could basically let some companies with a clear disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. Just to follow up on your comments, Julio, about Lithuania, for example, some countries go through an entire evaluation process and a full supervisory review, and then and only then will they grant a license. And sometimes that can take 9 months, a year, or longer. Whereas there are some other countries where you may apply to be put on a registry, but when you apply, you are supposed to be fully ready to be fully compliant with all of the AML regulations in that jurisdiction. So that would mean your compliance department should already be in place, all your policy and procedures and transaction monitoring ready to go. So you could apply, for example, Lithuania to be placed on their registry, but then you have to be fully prepared to be inspected by the AML supervisors at the FIU immediately. So there are just different approaches. So you have to be sure that if you take the approach of going to a country where you register and then are subsequent to after the fact inspection, that you understand the full implications of that. It is not that you're going to get an easy time of it. You have to really work to make sure your framework and your company is fully set up. You have all the staff, the reporting, capital requirements, everything already in place. But you can register with a little bit more rapidly. So that's something you have to consider. And sometimes these countries take a look at the number of applicants they have, and recently some of them have been removed from the registry because they weren't fully meeting their requirements. So you have to make sure that you're going to meet the requirements and continue to meet them throughout the time you're operating there.
Totally agree, and I think that that's something that right now it needs to be solved into the crypto space, because we have I would say that an important gap between the theoretical processes and the actual processes. So from what they say is happening in the policies and procedures and what is actually happening. So when you are applying for a registry in Spain, for example, some companies are considering that it's just some lines and some procedures that are a copy paste, and you deliver that, and if they approve you, they are not gonna never call you and ask you to show what you have, but that could happen. And it's important that the crypto companies are aware of that, not just for AML, of course, but also what is coming from MiCA, which covers a much more wide spectrum of aspects.
Yeah,
Great.
Agree.
So moving on to our next question, the title of our webinar is Exceeding Compliance Requirements or Staying Ahead of the Compliance Curve. Of course, AML requirements are definitely a key criteria of this. From a practitioner's perspective, what have you seen in terms of the AML requirements with MiCA? How do you think companies can use technology vendors to stay ahead of the compliance curve here?
Arnolin, if you want to, if not, I can take it first, and you can add. So in terms of and as you said, going a little bit out of MiCA, in terms of AML, I think that we have been through a process in the industry. We started believing that AML was nothing, and you have to maybe ask 2 questions at the KYC, and that was it. But right now, I think that the industry has, let's say, matured a lot, and we have very clear. Every single data service provider that is offering service right now has clear that AML it's a priority, and then they need to establish processes to understand what are the things that they need to be aware, to know better the clients, and of course use technology. At this point, I'm seen as a key point for companies to be able to understand the 2 worlds, the fiat world and the crypto world. So being able to have a very good, let's say, blockchain analytic tool in order to monitoring what is happening on chain, but also having an engine, or depends, they could have a vendor or they have developments in-house in order to also monitor what is happening in the fiat world. So having an holistic view of the client, for me, it's the key point, and probably the thing that the crypto companies needs to focus more, because they are, I think, understanding the risk of what is happening on chain. They are starting to understand that also they need to monitor what is happening off chain, what is happening on chain. But now I think they need to go further and put that together with the KYC information, with the transactional patterns that they have gathered in the years that they've been in the business. So putting that all together and having the let's say the complete view of the clients, having, as I said, and used to repeat myself, the 3 components: the understanding of the client, the knowledge of the client, very good KYC, and very good refreshments on the information of the client. Who is my client, and who is he declaring that or what is the activity that he is declaring? Also, what he is doing on chain, where is the client sending transaction, which are the addresses that my client is interacting with, and also which are the patterns that are happening in the fiat activity or the off-chain world. So for me, these three, let's say, pillars together are probably the thing that the crypto companies needs to focus on more.
Just to follow on from some of those themes, the top thing for anyone entering the market is you have to have an AML business-wide risk assessment, and it has to be very thorough. So you have to look at, first of all of your AML risks, which are considered by the regulators to be the top risk really in this space. Second of all, you're looking at a broad range of other risks when you're entering into the MiCA regulatory framework: operational risk, cybersecurity, capital requirements, links to your custody services and how they're managed. Consumer protection is the key goal for MiCA. So the conduct provisions and controlling your communications to consumers is very, very important as well. So you have to really make a plan for offering and controlling all of these risks at the same time. Also, you have the opportunity through some of the RegTech services to be able to use EID, and in particularly in some regions such as Scandinavia, there's a widespread use of government databases for identity services. So you may be able to use some services in regional areas that can provide a lot of efficiency, speed of onboarding, and assist your onboarding processes to be as user-friendly as possible. So I also think that using services for screening, PEPs, sanctions, and adverse media are critically important in doing your due diligence, and your EDD, which is required for certain higher risk clients and higher risk jurisdictions. In the UK, we've recently had an update to our high risk jurisdictions list in November of 2022. So you do have to pay attention to high risk transactions, both from your transaction monitoring. So having a very good transaction monitoring service is very, very important. Last but not least, I think chain analytics are very important. We did a competitive analysis here at my company, and we selected Merkle Sciences. So we're pleased with their risk reporting, and I think that using all types of screening for wallet addresses is very important.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot for that. I think there's a few questions that might be relevant.
Just a final comment on that before to go into the questions. I will be quick, I promise. I think that for crypto companies right now, it's also important to let's say adapt the reality, or adapt the let's say the things that they build in terms of compliance, not use AML, to the reality of their business. There is a minimum, let's say, that they have always to comply, but in terms of let's say comply in a good manner and also do not die, which is important because it's also happening. They need to be, let's say, proportionate to the business that they have. So that's also an important point to keep in mind, because when you see all those requirements and all the things that you have to do, you can get crazy. So step by step, defining very well what is the minimum that the regulator is expecting, and building from that. And last comment, and that's important, just regarding transaction monitoring, and also a brief comment on Merkle Science. I think it's important that companies start to understand that the compliance technology needs to have some interconnection between them. So having my blockchain analytic tools connected in some manner through API to the engine or the scenarios that I'm using to monitor the clients, it's important, and it will help you a lot. So I think in that Merkle Science could respond very well, in order to, when the reality of the business force you to go quick and to have many spatial analysis reports and many clients onboarded, you need to be able to do that, and in the same manner that the financial institutions has done in the previous years. So you can pass to the question, Miranka.
Yeah, no, I think some of those questions were actually relating to MiCA and its regulatory requirements. I think one question that keeps coming up is how is DeFi covered within MiCA? What should DeFi companies look for? And I think in the Q&A as well, somebody's asked about self-custody service providers. So how would you say MiCA impacts companies like MetaMask or DeFi companies in the space?
Okay, DeFi is not in scope of MiCA, except it will apply if only part of the activity is decentralized. So if you have a fully decentralized service, MiCA is not applicable. But if you have a business technology service that is partly decentralized and partly centralized, then MiCA may apply, and you need to get an analysis done of that.
Great. And self-custody, and how would that also follow similar rules as potentially fully decentralized companies?
Yeah, here the point, and at least how it's defined on the regulation, it focuses on the company that is providing the service of custodying the private keys or safekeeping the private keys of the wallet. So if you are not safekeeping the private keys, you are not within the MiCA scope. There are some cases where probably are gray spaces, and those are questions that are happening because we have in the market a lot of, let's say, technological providers for custody. I'm not just talking about the MetaMask, but also the place that you already know, Fireblocks, Copper, Metaco, and all of those guys. So in principle, as long as the company is using that provider as a software, it won't be a problem. In the same manner that if I use MetaMask, so MetaMask won't be a provider under MiCA. But based on the service, based on the model that you propose, that could change a little bit. So in principle, and giving a final answer, MetaMask will be out of MiCA as a provider, and I could be using MetaMask without MetaMask having to be under MiCA.
Great. Yeah, thanks for the clarifications, Lynn and Julio. So we're close to the end now. So closing comments. What do the next 18 months look like for MiCA? And what is the one piece of advice you would give to CASPs who are looking at MiCA, and what should they look out for?
Okay, I'll take this first. In the next 18 months, in 12 months, the rules around stablecoins will go into effect. So 12 months after the passage of MiCA, which would put it into second quarter of 2024, and then all the other provisions of MiCA or everything else go into effect 6 months later, so in the fourth quarter of 2024. So those are the two sort of deadline dates that you will see. Then in 3 years, there will be a report given to the European Commission on how MiCA has been functioning, and all of the ESAs will give feedback to the European Commission. So that's when they may eventually have a MiCA version 2 or update MiCA. So 3 years afterwards. In terms of advice, I know it's very traditional advice, but I really think if you do a very, very good risk assessment of your AML risks and your risks around all the other products that you're offering, I think that should lead the rest of your implementation. So spend time on your risk assessment, and your implementation will be able to be more effective. Over to you, Julio.
Totally agree on your points, Lynn. I would add that and probably giving two messages. One for the regulated or traditional companies that are willing to understand how MiCA applies to them. We know that there are many exceptions. It depends on the license that this traditional company could have. But from a strategical point of view, they need to perform a reflection. So that's an important point. If I'm a bank or an electronic money institution, I need to understand what is potentially my role under MiCA. And also, even when I'm under exceptions for some services, you have to adapt policies and procedures in order to cover the new risks and the new type of activities that you are going to provide. And the message for CASP, and it's in the line with the message that Lynn has just provided. There are a lot of work to do in many areas of compliance and let's say traditional stuff that they were not having on the radar until now. So it's important that they start as soon as possible to build policies and procedures, to understand the risk. This is very important, risk assessment in order to understand the risk and start to build the capabilities and procedures in order to comply with what MiCA is requesting. And of course, we are here more than happy to help on those topics.
Great. Thank you, panelists. I think we have a lot of questions in the Q&A section. We do have time for probably two. So one question comes from a financial institution. So how does MiCA affect financial institutions? What type of KYT requirements may they have if they choose to delve in crypto?
Yeah, well, I will take that one, and please, Lynn, add whatever you consider. Regarding financial institutions, there are exceptions in terms of licensing. So if you are a credit institution, a bank, you don't have to request a license, but you do have to control the risk. So you need to assess the new risk that you are basically exposed to, and based on that, you need to build controls and procedures that responds to those risks. In terms of KYT, of course, you need a blockchain analytic tool. That's something that is, I think, agreed on the market. In the moment that you have exposure to crypto assets, even when you are a bank, you need to monitor what is happening. Also, you will have to comply with travel rule requirements, because in that sense, you are, of course, under the scope of the travel rule regulation. So you will need to build KYT capabilities, and as I said, on-chain using blockchain analytics, but also off-chain, and combine both of them with the knowledge of the client.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that, Julio. I think Nigel's asked an interesting question as well. Do you think that many non-EU crypto firms will rely on reverse solicitation point in order to not have to perform a CASP registration within the EU?
I think there will be some. I think that the consumers in the European markets will want to deal with a registered firm in many ways. The crypto asset world is a world that has had a lot of publicity around scams, hacks, and a lot of financial issues over the last several years. So I think building trust is very important. So local consumers will want to deal with a local recognized name that has a regulation or a registration from their local recognized authority. So I think there'll be a lot of consumer trust building activities, and that won't necessarily be favorable for offshore firms that are not registered and are not soliciting in the local market.
Great. I think we have time for one more question, and then we move to the close. Are there any specific assessments or evaluations that CASPs might need to undergo in the pre-licensing stage from a financial, technical, or operational audit perspective?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of stuff that the CASP has to do in order to, I mean, previously to go to the license stage. There is a lot of preparations in terms of depending, of course, on the activity, but imagining that we are talking about a digital asset custodian, you need to build a lot of processes around the custody activity in terms of resilience, business and continuity and disaster. You need to define very well what is your policies in terms of segregation of wallets. Of course, all the things that are outside the pure technical thing is something that you have to define. There are requirements in terms of on funds. Even when some people is not considered that they are too high, you have to deal with that before to go to the license. It's important also, it's an option that is under or is described in MiCA. If you are a custodian, you need to have an insurance policy, which is not easy. And probably some of you in the audience are custodians, you know how hard is to get an insurance for custody digital assets. So those requirements are things that you need to build before the pre-license stage. So it's important, as I said, that the companies start to build a gap analysis right now between what they have and what is the MiCA expectation. And based on that, they define action plans in order to comply or to cover those gaps as soon as possible, and in order to be prepared for the next in the next year and a half that we have, the 18 months.
Mm-hmm. Following on from 2 points that Julio didn't mention, you may also have to take into account dealing with a data privacy regulator, and also registering with the appropriate financial crime government agency for the reporting of suspicious activities, which are normally required in each jurisdiction. So whether it's TRACFIN in France, the National Crime Agency in the UK, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll have to have those reporting processes put in place, and they would have to be operating successfully and at the time that your registration commences. So don't forget about those two areas as well, data privacy and financial crime regulatory reporting.
Great. Something a little more tactical that Matt's asked, does the passport apply to UK-based companies post-Brexit looking to provide services to clients in the EU?
The answer is no. Currently, the UK registration is not passportable into the EU. So, and we don't believe that anyone who's going to register in the EU would be passporting into the UK either.
All right, perfect. With this, we come to the close. Thank you very much, Julio and Lynn. I think this was a very insightful session, very detailed. Thanks a lot to all the attendees for taking out time to attend Merkle Meets. Definitely a very high level of engagement. For all the questions that have not been answered during the session, we are going to come up with a blog post right after the webinar, which will have the answers to all your questions. And stay tuned to Merkle Science Meets. We provide blockchain analytics, blockchain risk intelligence that's predictive. We help you stay ahead of the compliance curve, and we will be covering more interesting regulatory topics from across the world in our next few Merkle Meets sessions as well. The next one, in fact, is for the UAE. Right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Julio. Thanks, Lynn. And thanks to all the attendees.
Thanks, Pragata. Bye-bye.